My stepmom forced me to give up the newly made wedding dress to my stepsister. When fighting back didn't work, I gave up. That night, she found out the dress had fused with my stepsister's skin. If you wanted to take it off, it meant tearing off a layer of skin. She cried and begged me, but I could only shake my head helplessly. Stealing a vengeful ghost's wedding dress isn't just about losing a layer of skin. My name's Ariana, and I was born with the ability to see ghosts. Ghosts with unfinished business love coming to me for help. This time, it was a ghost lady in red, who I call Ruby. Ruby was robbed and decapitated in life. The anger from her death turned her into a vengeful ghost who tore apart her murderer. Her greatest wish was to wear a wedding dress and marry her true love. I could make a dress, but did she expect me to kill her love? Ruby giggled. In the dim light, a girl in a red dress stood holding her own head. Her laughter made the lights flicker and a chilly breeze swept by. If I wasn't strong-hearted, I'd have been scared stiff. I said, "Cut it out, it's creepy." Ruby awkwardly stopped laughing. "Why don't you just help with the dress first?" I take back the easy part. It took 3 months to get her that dress. I hung it in front of the mirror, planning for her to check it out at night. I fell asleep. Half asleep, it felt like someone pushed my door open. Unlike with ghosts, here, no one would dare disturb me. My eyes were too heavy to care. When I opened them later, the dress was gone. In the living room, unexpected guests filled the space. Helen flaunted the dress, looking like a princess. When I appeared, the lively atmosphere suddenly turned cold. Helen smiled, linking arms like we were close. But her fingers dug painfully into my side. "Isn't it pretty?" she asked. I gave her a look. "Yeah, it'll be prettier when you die. Take it off." I tried to walk her away. Helen pushed back, clutching the dress and cried pitifully, as if I was the thief. "Why?" she asked. "If you like it so much, I'll give it to you." I laughed with disbelief. I made that dress, now she's offering it back. Her thinking must be out of this world. I was tired of arguing, so I gently warned her. "You don't want to mess with the owner. Take it off." You'd think she'd listen, but she cried even harder, pretending to be a victim. My patience ran out. "Don't say I didn't warn you. If you take it off now, there's a chance to fix things. Otherwise, it won't end well." I wasn't lying. Stealing from a vengeful ghost could cost you. I dislike her, but it's a human life. She hasn't worn it too long, the ghostly presence isn't strong yet. There was still a chance I could help. But too long, and the ghost would track her. Smack! A slap stung my cheek. My stepmom stood blocking Helen, angrily staring at me. "It's just a silly object, yet you'd curse your sister?" said my aunt. The others joined in putting me down. I knew I shouldn't have let her stay. "Exactly, she's always been this ungrateful wolf," stepmom hissed, leaning to whisper, "If you don't give your sister the dress, I'll have your mother's grave moved, and you'll never find it." Her words burned through me. I shoved her away, only for Dad to catch her fall. More accusations followed. Stepmom cried, playing victim, blaming it all on me. "Don't blame Ariana. It wasn't her fault," she cried, while Dad was fuming at me. "Not even an animal would do this," he hailed, backed by a chorus of reprimands. I felt it was justified. I held back nothing, simply getting ready to leave. Yet, before I could exit, my ex-boyfriend Simon entered. My fam had mentioned Helen bringing home a boyfriend. I never thought it was Simon. No wonder he left me abruptly. Helen rushed to him, sobbing into his arms. "Ariana, are you bullying her again? I know you can't let go of me, but I only love Helen now." I stared at him, disgusted. Really, I thought. Helen approached, whispering so only I could hear, "People should know their place. The dress looks better on me. Neither people nor things are within your grasp. You'd better give up." Then she raised her voice, tearfully offering me the dress. She tried pulling it off, only to grimace in pain. Simon comforted her, glaring at me. But I was unbothered since the ghost would soon arrive. With a smile, I said, "The dress will find you, Helen. Goodbye." I turned away, noticing Helen struggling with the dress, assuming it got stuck. She soon gave up, happily going to meet the elders with Simon. Soft thuds came from above, as a round object rolled down. Ruby's head rolled before me, chilling my toes as its long hair swept by. I played it cool and composed, swiftly heading upstairs. Watching Helen from the stairway, she, too, heard the sound, glancing back to meet Ruby's eyes. My heart skipped as I saw the scene unfold. Helen's shrill voice was almost piercing my eardrums. She dove into Simon's arms, trembling and pointing at the ground. Simon glanced down, frowned, and tried to console her. "You're seeing things. There's nothing to worry about. If there is a ghost, I'll knock it out. Don't be scared. Then go, quickly." Helen pushed Simon forward. His foot passed right through Ruby's head, facing away from Helen. Simon dropped the act, sighed, and even muttered, "Idiot," under his breath before turning back towards Helen with a smile. "See, there's nothing there." Ruby's head rolled to Helen's feet, her hair wrapping around Helen's legs. Panicking, Helen fled, hair trailing behind her, with a head floating close by. Nobody else saw Ruby's head, only Helen running around like a maniac. She was cornered, shaking all over, tears flowing uncontrollably. "Please, let me go. I'll give you anything you want," she begged. Ruby's head floated in the air, staring at Helen. "I want you to die." Helen finally couldn't take it anymore and passed out. I was watching, completely absorbed, when someone tapped me on the back, giving me a start. I turned around to see a headless body, a neat scar across the neck, faint streaks of blood visible. Yet, I heard a plaintive voice behind me, "Ariana, my dress." I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead. I really couldn't handle one more day of this. On the first floor, Simon scooped up Helen, with Dad and my stepmom trailing worriedly behind. The other relatives exchanged glances and followed them out. The once bustling house suddenly became silent, with just me and Ruby left. I returned to my room and hugged my plush toy. If Mom were still here, she'd worry about me just like stepmom worries about Helen. Ruby noticed I was out of sorts and quietly sat aside, though the head in her arms stared directly at me. It was a truly creepy sight. At 3 a.m., in a half-asleep state, my door was suddenly kicked open. "You little brat, how dare you sleep?" Stepmom was yanking at me, swearing heavily. I could tell right away that Dad wasn't home. Otherwise, she'd switched to her sweet tea persona instead of going 800 miles an hour at me. "So, did you scare Helen on purpose with your ghost tricks?" I sat up, yawning, ignoring her accusations. Instead, I glanced past her at Helen, who looked pale enough to have painted walls all night. Her eyes were sunken, an ominous shadow hanging over her brow. Not much time left, it seemed. I nodded towards Helen. "Do you think you can take off that dress?" At these words, stepmom's eyes fell on Helen too. Helen tentatively touched her wedding dress and her eyes widened in disbelief. What she touched was her skin. Stepmom sensed something was wrong, moved behind Helen to find the zipper. It came off with a chunk of skin, causing Helen to scream in pain. "Mom!" Helen stomped her foot, on the verge of tears, blaming her mom, while checking her blood-stained hands. What is happening?" Stepmom ditched her usual bossy demeanor and stammered, "That dress on you, it's made for a ghost." I paused, then added, "Oh, and not just any ghost, a vengeful one." Snatching a ghost's dress isn't just about shedding skin. Vengeful ghosts use such clothes to drain your life force and consume your body until what's left becomes one with the dress. Hearing this, both of them were stunned speechless. After a moment of blank stares, stepmom lashed out with a slap. "Why didn't you say anything earlier? You're a wicked brat, watching your sister die. I'll kill you." She came at me, trying to grab my hair. I dodged, kicked her in the stomach, sending her to the floor. "Even if I told you earlier, would you believe me?" Stepmom swallowed hard as words failed her. All three of us knew the answer. They wouldn't have believed me. They'd accuse me of being superstitious and report me to Dad, claiming I cursed my sister because I didn't want to share. That play had been acted out too many times. So why make things difficult for myself? Besides, I did warn them. They got themselves into this mess. Helen stood frozen, lips pale, body trembling. I figured she was thinking of Ruby's bodiless head. "You're full of it. You tampered with the dress to scare me. I won't fall for it. Mom, let's go to the hospital. I bet they can fix this." The mention of a hospital seemed to snap stepmom back to her senses. She glared at me. "Yeah, let's go. Mom will take you to the best hospital." I had nothing more to say. Relaxing against the headboard, I tucked myself in. "Don't say I didn't warn you. Once the hospital guys see you as a freak, they'll probably have a field day studying you. That's a whole new level of torment." Helen hesitated, suddenly unsure, and looked for guidance from stepmom. "Mom, it's okay, trust me," stepmom assured, pulling Helen into a hug and walking her out the door. I watched the now broken door hang loosely, a strange feeling stirring inside me. I hugged the plush close, burying my head into its neck as if embracing Mom. "Mom, just wait a little longer." I didn't see Helen or stepmom the next day until dinner. Helen showed up at the table, face pale but not as bad as expected. She seemed relaxed, humming a tune. Upon seeing me, she rolled her eyes and snorted, "Some people think they're so indispensable. I bet you were waiting all night for us to come begging, huh? Sorry to let you down though." Swinging her head in satisfaction, she chomped on her bread. My gaze quickly scanned over her. The dress was clearly still on her. What happened? I sat down across from her and slid a cup of water her way. "Here, use this. All the nonsense in your head is spraying on my face." "You," she exclaimed angrily, slapping the table. Then she paused, smirked, and said, "Never mind, I'm not gonna stoop to your level." Normally, Helen would have argued back, but today, she was acting unusual. I stepped back a bit, my eyes drifting to her lower half. "Hold on. Where's the train on her wedding dress?" I snapped a look at Helen. "Did you cut off the train?" "Yep." Helen tilted her chin up, looking all smug. But to me, she just seemed foolish. I couldn't imagine what bad advice she was given. The train had support from the dress's hoop, so it hadn't been stuck to her for long. Cutting it off and putting it on someone else would only distract the ghost temporarily. Once the ghost realized it was tricked and the dress was damaged, it would get even angrier. It seemed like she escaped for now, but really, it was speeding up her demise. I mostly cared about where she put that part of the dress. As she fiddled with a spoon and made a video call, her eyes kept darting my way. When the screen connected, a familiar voice came through. "Honey, I can't pick you up tomorrow." Trying too hard, Helen brushed her non-existent sideburns. Her sugary voice gave me goosebumps. "Simon darling, you look so tired. Get some rest. I'll be okay." I had a hunch. While Helen flirted with Simon, I snatched the phone. Simon, looking pale against his pillow, was as sickly as Helen was yesterday. "Ariana, you can't just grab someone else's phone to see me. I told you, I only love Helen. Give it up." I glared at him, calling him ridiculous, then tossed the phone back to Helen. Sometimes, I do think he kind of deserves this for being such a jerk. But in this case, he's innocent. As shady as he is, he doesn't deserve to die. I hesitated but finally headed out, hoping to stop things before Ruby acted. The night was dark except for the dim streetlights casting shadows on the winding road. Reaching Simon's building, I heard glass shattering above. I instinctively stepped away. A thud followed, the ground trembling. Simon lay not far from me, eyes wide open. Damn! I was too late. A thick shadow descended, revealing Ruby's ghostly form cradling ahead, glaring with eyes and clenching Simon's arm in her mouth. Blood dripped onto the pavement. Ruby was furious after realizing the deception. She was ready to tear into anyone. Dropping Simon's arm, she lunged at me, her spectral form reaching out. I drew a talisman and hurled it at her, grabbing a gourd as she struggled. Emily, a Taoist priestess I once met, gave me these along with a few mantras, promising they'd come in handy. Focusing, I recited the chant. Ruby's spirit turned into smoke, sealed into the gourd. I sighed in relief, stroking the gourd. Rest now, I whispered. After everything, I checked Simon's body. Sure enough, Helen had fashioned the train into a vest for him. But it seemed there was still more fabric missing, leaving me with a foreboding feeling. Calling the authorities, I rushed home. Dad was sipping on his hangover cure. I grabbed his bowl, sitting him up to check his face. Rosy cheeks, no signs of anything wrong. Still skeptical, I pulled at his collar, him drunkenly holding my arm. Giselle, he muttered, dazed eyes meeting mine. Why's our kid so troublesome? Giselle was my mom's name. I yanked my hand free, smashing the bowl down. You've no right to say her name. He sobered a bit, his pupils narrowing on me. Before he could speak, I headed upstairs, denying him any chance to scold. I only heard his long, weary sigh. In my room, I collected myself, changing into my nightdress, but I felt something odd. Checking inside, I found it lined with more wedding dress fabric. Helen, calling Simon in front of me, just wanted to get me out. But she ended up causing his death. I removed the fabric, dressed, and released Ruby, her gaze still lingering warmly on me. Ariana, what happened earlier? I forced a smile. Nothing, just keeping your spirit safe in the gourd. Oh. Good thing I didn't hurt you. She bowed her head like a guilty child. My eyes stung. I blinked hard, but a tear slipped out. Ruby's hand passed through my cheek, trying to comfort me. I'm so useless, she said softly. Can't handle even small things. It broke me, tears flowing uncontrollably. I turned away, avoiding her gaze. Man, this was getting too emotional. The door creaked open slightly, someone sharply inhaling. Hiding under my covers, I saw Ruby's spooky grin. Gonna get ya. Helen screamed, running as Ruby's head trailed her neck, the body right behind. Why chase me? Go after Ariana. She's got fabric too. She shrieked. Out of breath, she stumbled, face reddening, clutching her neck as she fell. My stepmom and dad rushed over, her trembling hand holding Helen's. She couldn't speak for the tears. Helen glanced at me, pleading. Help me, she mouthed desperately. I threw the fabric at her face. Why should I? When Ruby saw the wedding dress, she let out a terrifying screech. The hair wrapped around Helen's neck loosened, floating in mid-air. Helen caught her breath, taking deep gulps of air. But then, as she saw the ghostly figure of Ruby draw nearer, she froze in terror. A foul smell spread through the room. Helen, what's wrong? Don't scare Mom like that. Lily, please, you gotta save her. I'm begging you. My stepmom, even though she couldn't see Ruby, knew something was up with Helen and that it was ghost-related. She knelt in front of me, banging her head on the floor. I watched her calmly. "I can save her, but I have one condition." "Name it, no matter what it is, I'll agree." I smiled gently and said, "I need to know how my mom really died." My stepmom, who was kneeling, sank to the ground, avoiding my gaze. She was just caught in a robbery." As soon as the words left her mouth, I pulled off Helen's nightgown, revealing a wedding dress cut in half. Ruby's eyes were blood red, almost dripping with rage. She opened her mouth wide and bit down hard on Helen's shoulder. Helen shut her eyes tight and tried to jerk away. A piece of flesh was torn away, exposing bone beneath. This time, it was my stepmom. She was hysterical, holding Helen and trying to stop the bleeding with her hands. But it was useless. Blood seeped through her fingers and onto the floor. I stepped closer. My mom was in this much pain too, right? Probably even more. Her head was cut off, after all. My stepmom was trembling violently, on the verge of a breakdown. I glanced at Ruby, who had finished her gruesome feast and was baring her bloody teeth, ready to attack again. "Are you going to talk or not?" I pulled out a charm and moved towards my stepmom, my other hand ready to cast a spell. Finally, she broke down, crying as she held Helen, helpless on the floor. "Fine, I'll tell." As Ruby was about to sink her teeth into Helen again, I slapped the charm on Ruby's head. With the last incantation, Ruby calmed once more. Helen breathed a sigh of relief, collapsing into her stepmom's arms. The private doctor arrived quickly. After stopping the bleeding, he suggested taking Helen straight to the hospital. My stepmom glanced at me, thanked him, and saw him out. Our family sat at the dining table, and I placed a chair beside me. My dad gave me a puzzled look. "What's this for?" "For my mom," I said nonchalantly, smiling at Ruby who sat in the empty chair. She seemed a little out of place and started to rise, but she saw my smile and sat back down. My stepmom and dad looked at me, shocked, maybe thinking I was losing it. But Helen stared wide-eyed at Ruby, as if trying to figure out if she was really my mom. My stepmom suddenly chuckled, breaking the heavy atmosphere. "This was all on purpose, wasn't it?" I sneered. Of course, my stepmom was sharp as ever. "I did it on purpose. All of it. And, yes, Ruby is my mom. My parents built everything from scratch and used to be deeply in love. But people, you know? They can get through hard times together but not the good." After my mom got pregnant, my dad asked her to quit her job and focus on her pregnancy. That break lasted 8 years. Right after she quit, my dad hired a secretary, my current stepmom. When I was 7, Mom went out to buy groceries and was robbed. She lost her life, not just her money. I always felt something was off about her death. She told me she was buying groceries, but she wore a bright red dress. It was a dress Dad gave her on New Year's, one she hardly wore unless there was a special reason. And get this, I've heard that my stepmom was with her during the robbery, yet she didn't have a scratch on her. Less than a year after Mom passed, my stepmom moved in with Helen. Even though it was my house, it felt like I was a guest, keeping my head down as they constantly bullied me, all to figure out the truth about Mom's death. The night Mom died, she came back. Her red dress was soaked in blood. She stood at the entrance, smiling at me. Her head rested lovingly in her arms, but her face was scarred, some flesh still turned inside out. I was terrified, not of my mom's ghost, but because I knew she was gone. I knew she'd never hug me again. Maybe because her death was so painful, my mom's spirit lost her memory. She forgot everyone except me. She stayed by my side. During the day, she'd inhabit my dolls. At night, we'd talk. At first, I insisted on calling her Mom. It seemed to hurt her. As I kept calling her that, her ghostly form grew, and she attacked me. That was the first time I saw a spirit like that, and when I met Master Emily. She helped calm my mom's spirit. She said, "Your mom has unfinished business and can't move on yet. To set her free, you must help her resolve it." So, I'd often ask what she wished for. She couldn't think of anything for a long time, until one day she said she wanted to wear a wedding dress and marry the one she loved. The dress she described was one I had seen in a magazine. I was young then, sitting in her lap, pointing at the dress in the magazine, stuttering as I mimicked adults, saying, "When I grow up, I'll wear that dress and marry my love." My mom gently stroked my hair and said, "Yes, our Ariana will be the most beautiful bride." She must have been picturing what I'd look like in a wedding dress. Sadly, she was forever trapped in that summer. I looked into everything, but never found the real cause of her death. My only lead was my stepmom, who was also supposedly robbed with her, but she'd never tell me the truth. Helen was her weak spot, so I went after her. The wedding dress style was pretty dated, no stores sold it anymore. So, it took me 3 months to make the dress myself. The materials? I got them from my ghost friends. Once someone wore it, it fused with their skin, making it impossible to remove. And I knew that if I liked something, Helen would want it too. Simon visiting was the perfect timing to get Helen into that wedding dress. Because she didn't just want to show off to Simon, she wanted him and all the relatives and friends to see me as the evil sister who can't stand her doing well. So, the day before Simon visited our parents, I deliberately brought the wedding dress back and hung it in an obvious spot to make sure Helen would see it when she snooped around. Sure enough, she stole the wedding dress. When Helen saw Mom's head, I was afraid she'd recognize her. But Mom's face was scarred beyond recognition, plus Helen was too scared to take a close look. Everything unfolded as I planned, except I didn't expect Helen to harm Simon for her own sake. I glanced at the ghost that drifted in, then looked up at Helen. "Did you know, Simon's dead? Because of the clothes you gave him." Helen was startled at first, then she spoke coldly. "Dying for me was a privilege for him. Did you think I really liked him? So cheap and average looking, just a basic dude. I only went after him because you liked him." Helen bowed her head, her voice growing softer until it was almost inaudible. Simon stood in shock in front of her, his spirit unsteadily swaying. I shook my head, not wanting to dwell on this any longer. I turned to look at my stepmother. "Now, can you start talking?" My stepmother bit her lip and slowly began. "It was true that I called Giselle, and it's true she was killed, but..." She glanced at my dad. "The murderer was my ex-husband." That one sentence shocked not just me but my dad, too. It was then I learned that my stepmother had called my mom that day to discuss breaking up with my dad. My mom, thinking she was going to confront the other woman, dressed up nicely. It turned out that my stepmother's ex-husband was forcing her for money. With no other choice, she lured my mom there, planning to kidnap her for ransom. The kidnapper saw my mom and lusted. My mom wasn't easy prey. She kicked him where it hurts, trying to escape, but my stepmother locked the door first. Infuriated, the kidnapper stabbed my mom. He went crazy, slashing 17 times all over her body and face, finally severing her head. As she lay in a pool of her own blood, she looked towards home. She must have been thinking, "My Ariana hasn't had dinner yet. How could you?" Dad roared, slamming his fist on the table, trembling all over. My stepmother hugged Helen, crying uncontrollably. I watched them coldly, feeling it was all too ridiculous. If it weren't for them, how would my mom have ended up in such a tragic situation in the first place? Why act so sentimental now? Why act remorseful? Mom clutched her head beside me, her expression filled with unbearable pain, her spirit violently shaking. With a series of shrill, furious howls, the lights in the room exploded one by one. Only 2 wall lights remained, flickering on and off. "Mary, open the door, or I'll haunt you forever." Memories rushed into Mom's mind like a floodgate had opened. Resentment, anger, and unwillingness amplified infinitely. Everyone present heard her cries and even saw her ghostly form grow several times larger. Stepmom Mary stopped crying, her face turning ghostly white, standing there with her mouth agape, staring at Mom in shock. "Giselle? Is it you, Giselle?" The stepmother stood up, fell to her knees, and banged her head against the floor with a thud. "I'm sorry, please spare me. I beg you," she pleaded while crawling towards me, clutching my hand. "Ariana, please beg your mom to let us go. I know I was wrong, and I'll spend the rest of my life chanting prayers and copying scriptures for her." I looked at her coldly and slapped her face. Wasn't my mom just as desperate back then? Who spared her? Her only escape door was mercilessly locked by you. Didn't she cry and scream for help? When she pleaded for sparing her, what were you doing? Stabbing her over and over again. I clenched my fists, pounding my chest as I shouted with a voice that was almost hoarse. I looked up, letting the tears fall into my collar, the cold wetness calming me down. "Today, no one gets out." I calmly walked over to the door and locked it with a click. "No, please." Helen stumbled over, trying to snatch the key from me, but I kicked her to the ground. Meanwhile, Mom fully regained her memory and hovered overhead, looking down at the stepmother, oozing ominous black energy. "Mary, I won't let you rest in peace." I don't know where Dad found the courage, but he charged forward, shielding the stepmother. "Giselle, calm down. Be gone." Mom waved a hand, sending Dad flying into the wall. Blood streamed down from his head, and he passed out completely. Then, Mom tore the stepmother to shreds. As her soul left the body, she devoured it in one gulp. Helen was scared out of her mind, pounding on the door, begging me to let her go. I looked up at Simon. "You have to face your karma." I opened the door, and Helen fled out, half crazed, with Simon following close behind. Mom turned to me, her dark eyes suddenly shimmering with a hint of light. "But ghosts can't cry." She whimpered, reaching to hold me. "I'm sorry, did I scare you?" I wanted to say, "I'm not scared, Mom," but my mouth opened and closed, unable to make a sound, so I just shook my head vigorously. Mom gently pushed me away, kindly wiping the tears off my face. But no matter how much she wiped, they wouldn't go away, and she could only smile at me helplessly. "My darling, you're so pretty. If you keep crying, you won't be." Since I was little, I loved being pretty, and whenever she said that, I'd stop crying right away. But this time, I couldn't stop. I don't know how long I cried until I was exhausted, slumping to the floor, leaning against her. Although I couldn't feel her warmth, I felt incredibly blessed. "Ariana, do you know what Mom's biggest wish is?" I turned my head sideways to look at her. Fearing she'd frighten me, she gently pressed my head back. She tenderly stroked my face, her eyes full of joy. "Mom's biggest wish is for you to have a safe, happy life. Can you promise me that?" Tears once again blurred my vision, and I choked out, "Mom, I promise." Mom nodded in satisfaction, her smile widening. But I could feel her spirit growing fainter, slowly dissipating. I stared without blinking, wanting to engrave her image in my mind. She seemed to understand my intent, keeping a gentle smile fixed on me until she fully vanished. Before fading completely, Mom left me with her last words. "In the next life, I still want to be your mom, just so I can love you a few more years." I opened my palm, touching the spot where she used to be. And answered, "Mom, you have to keep your promise." The next day, news of Helen's death came. She was hit by a car, but I knew Simon had a hand in it. Dad woke up, transferred all his assets to me, and turned himself in, claiming he killed my stepmother. Years later, I put on a wedding dress identical to that one and married the man who cherished me for life. Mom, see? I did it. 100 years later, a young, beautiful woman gave birth to a daughter. She said, let's call her Ariana. This time, they lived happily together, forever.